Very good afternoon, friends. I welcome you all to this webinar being hosted by Samishti Legal. My name is Raghu Babu. I am one of the co-founders and mentor and strategic advisor. Just to give, along with me, I have Prashant Jain, the co-founder, and Anita Dugar, the principal associate. We have, close to 40 people, participating in this webinar. That's a good sign on the Friday second half. We have, decent number. Whenever we do a session, the issue is, whether we have enough people, who wanted to attend these sessions. It's a good number to start. And I just wanted to take a minute or so, but otherwise the whole session is going to be run by Prashant and Anita. Just to give very, very, one, two-liner intro about the Samishti Legal. Samishti Legal is, very young, corporate legal services firm, 6 to 7 years of, existence. We do extensive work in the area of corporate legal and transaction advisory. Either the fundraising, shareholder agreement, stock option, structuring, collaborations, commercial contracts. This is the kind of work we have been doing, and we are very fortunate that we've been able to do a decent amount of work in Hyderabad, and we are associated with some of the companies which have raised funding from various stages. We have companies who have raised the seed round, angel round, growth capital. Some of our clients include MedPlus, Nephroplus, Ben Franklin. Some of that work we have been doing, and we work with early stage startups and startups very, very closely. We also work with some of the angel networks and the accelerators, T-Hub, all of them. And we understand startup space very, very clearly, and the founders' concern and what the challenges they go through. And that we keep doing on a daily basis. And we thought we must do to this community an education session which will help everyone. And we also have we also thought we should also, on a pro bono basis, somebody's startup which has not raised funds, you guys wanted to spend 15-20 minutes with any of us and get more insight or a more questions you have on particular either structuring, legal issue. We'll be happy to spend that time. So to give a quick introduction about Prashant. Prashant is a lawyer and a company secretary. Now he has close to 13-14 years of experience, and he has been doing extensive work in the corporate legal and a lot of large transactions in Hyderabad. Samishti and Prashant has been associated. And then coming to Anita. Anita is a principal associated, again a company secretary and lawyer, over 10 years of experience. Very, very very, very, what I call, a critical resource in the Samishti. And we also have other people from Samishti joining this webinar. With that brief, I would like to take leave and, give this platform to Prashant. Let's hope, we will be able to add value to the, your understanding, and, this 1.5 hour makes, very useful for all of startups. And we wanted to wish each startup to, come up very well and add value to you, your employees, and to the economy. And we believe the startups are the one which will have which can create a huge impact in Indian economy. India's growth. India 2030 or 5 trillion economy. I consider the startups will have a huge role to play in achieving what our Narendra Modi has set out to. So with that few words, I take leave. Wish you all the best. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Mr. Raghu Babu. Thanks for the introduction. So the agenda of this session would be primarily to discuss upon the type of entities and regulatory framework evolving around the entities. Then we will be discussing about the startup registration and benefits which the government of India has announced for startup. Then we will touch upon the topic of how do you protect your intellectual property and what is the importance of protecting the intellectual property. Then finally, we will be discussing about the founders agreement, basically between the co-founders, and what is the significance of executing the founders agreements. So this would be the basic agenda of the session. Just to give you a flavor, in India to start a business, there are two sets of entities. One set of entity will come with a limited liability. The other set of entities will come with an unlimited liability. So when I say limited liability, what happens is if you have, after you have started the business, if the entity has gone into losses, generally if a company has been floated with a limited liability feature, the assets of the promoters, owners, and directors will not be attached. It is only to the extent of assets which are available with that entity will be used to pay off the creditors. When it comes to the unlimited liability kind of a structure, wherein the liability is unlimited, and if the business is started in those kind of entities, to name few, sole proprietorship concern, partnership firm, in those kind of entities, if you have started a business and if the company goes south and if the company has losses, then in that scenario, the personal assets of the owners of that entity will be attached to basically pay off the creditors. So these are the two set of entities which will be which are available to start business in India. So in this session, we will be more discussing about the entities which have limited liability kind of a structure. And traditionally, for unlimited liabilities, you always have sole proprietorship firms and partnership firms. But for the purpose of this session, we will be touching upon more of the entities which are with limited liability kind of a structure. Now, under the limited liability kind of a structure, again, you have different buckets of companies. You have private companies, you have public companies, you have one-person companies. Again, you have a hybrid kind of a structure where the traditional partnership firm has been given a hybrid feature wherein it also comes with a limited liability. So when I say hybrid structure, this kind of firms are called limited liability partnership firms. So just to break the discussion, there are two types of entities. One would be a company, the other would be a limited liability partnerships. Under the company, you have, as I said, private company, public company, one-person company. But as a startup, if you want to basically evaluate which kind of structure you should basically go through, first you need to answer whether you want to go through a company kind of a structure or you want to go through a LLP kind of a structure. When I say LLP, it means limited liability partnership. So when you have decided that you want to basically go with a company kind of a structure, which again we will discuss how you will decide whether it should be a company or a LLP. Then you have what you call different questions to answer, whether it should be a private company, one-person company, or public company. So just to give you the brief understanding on the kind of structure and the kind of company you should choose. Now, public companies are companies which are basically used to raise public money. So when you're starting a business, on day one, you will not basically hit the market to raise money, or you cannot do basically an IPO on day one. So public companies are companies wherein you want to access public funds and go IPO. So on day one, public company is ruled out. It's always between a private company or a one-person company. After you have grown, you want to basically go access the public markets. That time you have to basically convert yourself from private to public. But on the day when you want to start the business, public companies are generally not considered because it is more from a perspective that you have to raise money from the external shareholders. So public company, I think day one that is ruled out. You should always basically consider whether it should be a private company or a one-person company. Now again, one-person company is a company where a single person can start the business. He will be the director of the company. He will also be the shareholders of the company. So between the private company and one-person company, under the Companies Act, one-person company has a lesser burden from a compliance standpoint. Otherwise, both are companies under the Companies Act. Because one-person company would be a smaller company, the Companies Act has given certain exemption in terms of compliance. But there are thresholds which have to be adhered to become a one-person company. So as long as your infusion of capital in the company is up to 50 lakhs, and as long as you have an income of average 2 crores in last 3 financial years, you can be a one-person company. But the moment you reach the thresholds of paid up capital and the revenue, then you have to convert yourself to a private company. So day one, if an entrepreneur thinks that he will only start the business, his business model will evolve, and then only he will basically get the revenues. And after he gets the revenues, he wants to convert to private company. That is also a good choice. So you can start with a one-person company, and then maybe over a period when you reach the thresholds, you can convert yourself to the private company. So this is the difference between a private company and a one-person company. Otherwise, both are companies under the Companies Act. And because of single-person company, because of the low revenue, low paid-up capital, Companies Act has given certain compliance relaxation to the one-person company. Otherwise, it's a company under the Companies Act. Now, once you have decided that you want to go for a private company or a one-person company, then the trade-off would be to decide whether you should also consider limited liability partnership as a structure to start your business. Now, when I compare the company under the Companies Act and LLP, there are two basic and fundamental questions which as an entrepreneur you need to answer. One would be you are starting the business, whether you want to access external money from HNIs, from VC, from PE guys, and then grow the business and exit the company at a future date. Then I would say that you should go for a private company kind of a structure, because in India it is well established, and it gives a lot of comfort to the investors, because LLP is a new structure which has evolved in last 3-4 years. So investors who wants to invest in a company will definitely want to come in a company structure, even though LLP has a limited liability feature, but still they would want to invest in a private company kind of a structure. But if entrepreneur believes that he wants to be privately operating, he will not raise any money in future, he will just enjoy the profits of the business, then I will suggest that you should go for an LLP, because limited liability partnerships have certain tax exemptions, tax benefits. But if you are looking for raising money and then taking an exit out of the company, definitely you should go for a private company. So that is the trade-off which the entrepreneur has to decide when he is taking a call whether he should go for a private company or a LLP. Public company, one-person company. Public company would come later. One-person company is, again, you can start with that, but ultimately once you reach the threshold, you have to convert yourself to a private company. So that is the basic difference. This slides gives you the number of directors, what is the capital contribution requirement, what is the maximum capital contribution you should bring in, what is the minimum. But to give you the essence, this was the what you call basic features, and how you as an entrepreneur should decide which kind of entity you should basically choose when you're starting the business. So as I told you, these are some of the advantages of each entity. For company, all the companies have what do you call, for company and limited liability partnership, you have the feature of limited liability, what do you call, wherein the personal assets of the promoters cannot be attached. All the sets have that feature. Then in terms of compliance, as I previously told you, if it's a limited liability partnership, the compliance are very less when compared to a company. In company kind of a structure, you have a lot of restrictions from which source you can raise money, whether the directors can put in money in the company as loan, whether the relatives of directors can bring in money, whether what kind of board meetings you have to conduct every year. So there are a lot of compliances which a company has to do when compared to a limited liability partnership. Limited liability partnership, again, has greater flexibility, minimum compliance, and it's again a corporate form of a partnership. So if, as I previously said, if you are looking for doing business, generating profits, and then just want to run the business, don't want to raise external money, don't want to take exit, you want to own the business, then it's always better to go for an LLP. But before you choose the LLP kind of a structure, there are 2-3 things which you have to keep in mind. One, if it's a company, then it is well accepted in the market. LLPs are still evolving and people don't have a lot of clarity. And when you are participating in government tenders, still LLP is an entity under the Limited Liability Partnership Act, having a limited liability feature. But the government tenders, the government officials who are sitting in the government departments still don't understand what is LLP. And if you want to raise any, what you call, bank funding, again, bankers also tend to basically ask questions if it's an LLP. So these are some, what you call, questions which you need to answer before you go for an LLP. Now, as I told you, these are the 4 heads which also are very important to decide whether it should be a company or a private limited company, whether it should be LLP or a private company. So from a compliance standpoint, LLP always has, what you call, lesser compliance than compared to a company. And from a tax perspective, as I already told you, in a company kind of a structure, you pay corporate tax of around 30% or 25%, depending upon the law which is applicable to the company. And in the LLP, you pay flat 30% tax, and the profits which are generated by the LLP are freely distributable to the partners. And at the partners level, the what do you call, the income tax is not again applicable. But when it comes to the company, you have to pay the corporate tax. Previously, recently, 1st April 2020, the government has exempted the DTD, dividend distribution tax. But when the shareholder gets the dividend out of the private limited company, that time the shareholders will again be taxed. So ultimately, what is happening is the company is paying the corporate tax of, say, 30%. Again, based on the individual slab, the shareholders of the company has to again pay tax which could range from 10 to 30%. But when it comes to LLP, once the LLP has paid the tax, the partners of the LLP need not pay any income tax at their personal level. So that is the biggest advantage which is basically available in an LLP. Again, one more what do you call a direction which we have to all think. One is basically if under the what do you call Income Tax Act, if you are a manufacturing company, you have been given what do you call income tax rate of 15%, but for LLP that advantage is not available. Even though you are a manufacturing LLP, you will not get that benefit. But when it comes to a company, if you are a manufacturing company, you get a 15% what do you call corporate tax benefit, but in LLP kind of a structure, you end up paying 30% tax. So that also has to be taken in what do you call cognizance when we are deciding what kind of entity we are floating and what kind of business we are doing and what are the chances that we will be raising external money, bank funding, and how the exit of the promoters will happen from the company. So that is very important to decide whether you should go for a company kind of a structure or LLP. So as I previously said, these are the tax rates. If your gross turnover is not more than 400 crores, you will end up paying. If it's more than 400 crores, you will end up paying 30%. But if it is less than 400 crores, you will pay 25%. But when it comes to LLP, it is flat 30% for all kind of incomes and all kind of businesses. Now, the other angle which we need to think through is basically whether the company or the LLP would be raising any kind of foreign money. So when I say foreign money, whether you will have your investors who are sitting outside India and you are looking for raising money from them, and they will become the part or full owners of this kind of structure. So under the company kind of a structure, FDI is defined based on the sectorial caps. So when I say sectorial caps, traditionally it means what kind of business you are operating into. So if you are into the business of pharma, you are allowed to bring 100% FDI. You are in the business of trading, you are allowed to bring 100% FDI. But if you are some other businesses like defense or software or greenfield pharma, brownfield pharma, there could be restrictions, or there could be what you call thresholds up to which you can bring the FDI. Say for example, if you are a company which is in the business of say insurance, you are allowed to bring 74% FDI, right? But if you are in the business of wholesale cash and carry trading, you are allowed to bring 100% FDI. But when it comes to LLP, the primary condition is that the businesses which are allowed under automatic route to bring 100% FDI, LLP can only bring in FDI in those businesses. But if in the sectorial gaps, if there are thresholds like 24%, 26%, 74%, that kind of businesses cannot get any FDI. They can't even get that kind of a threshold FDI into the LLP. So before deciding whether we should go for a LLP kind of a structure, this also has to be taken into consideration. So once you have decided that you want to float a LLP or a private limited company, then as promoters, you have to decide where do you want to incorporate this company, whether you want to incorporate this entity in Karnataka, whether you want to incorporate this entity in Maharashtra, whether you want to do it in Tamil Nadu. So basically that is what you call something which the promoter has to think through and decide. Generally what happens is if the founders of the company are from say Hyderabad, they will prefer to incorporate the company in Hyderabad. Today, sitting in Hyderabad, you can incorporate a company wherever you want because everything is digital. But from a regulatory standpoint, ease of doing business, the location has to be chosen. So traditionally, what happens is if the founder is sitting in Tamil Nadu, he will definitely want to incorporate a company in Tamil Nadu. That's how it works. But nowadays, people are also thinking what are the regulatory considerations. If I'm incorporating a company in Telangana, what is the labor law? What is the environmental law? What is the business law? Whether I have any tax benefits, tax subsidies. So that also has to be taken into consideration when you're choosing the location of your business. So the presence of founder, regulatory considerations, ease of doing business is very, very important to decide where you should float the entity. Now coming to the process of incorporation, if you have chosen to incorporate a private limited company, then or a LLP, the process is fairly similar. So one thing which you have to basically first decide is who will be the directors if it's a company, and who will be the partners, who will be the directors and shareholders if it's a company, and who will be the partners if it's an LLP. So in a company kind of a structure, the directors and the shareholders can be same or they can be different. It's up to the shareholders of the company to decide whether they want to be on the board or they want to basically put somebody on the board and they will become the owners of the company. But in LLP, there is no concept of directors. It's all the partners who will be basically the owners of the company. So if you have decided that who will be the directors and who will be the partners, then you basically go ahead and take a director identification number. It's called as DIN. So first step is to get the director identification number, which is fairly simple. There is a mechanism under the MCA 21 regime wherein you can apply for a director identification number. And then once you have the identification number, you also need to have a digital signature. So this is electronic signature, which there are a lot of vendors who will issue this. So once you have the, then you have to decide what kind of name you want for your entity. So you have to decide the name of the entity. And generally what happens is, for deciding the name of the entity, you need to basically do some kind of a research, whether the same entity name is used by somebody else. And basis that, you will basically give, maybe if you have hired a consultant, you will give 2-3 names to the consultant. And based on the priority, you can guide the consultant that which name is more preferred for you. Basis that, the name can be applied. So before applying the name, the consultant would definitely check on the registry side whether there are any similar or same names which are basically used by third parties. If there are same names or similar names, then you basically have to go for some other name. So once you have filed for the approval of name, then the register of companies will basically allot you the name. And once you have got the name availability, then you have to file the incorporation documents. So when I say the incorporation documents, you need to basically file the memorandum of association and the articles of association of the company. So MOA talks about the objects of the company. So object means what business you will be doing in the company, whether you will be in the business of finance, you will be in the business of pharma, whether you will be in the business of software. That has to be defined in the memorandum of the association. And in articles of association, we will talk about how the company will be governing itself, who will be the shareholders, how the board meetings will be conducted, how the general meetings will be conducted, what kind of thresholds you want to put in for specific approvals. So it's like a charter document for day-to-day business operations of the company. So MOA, AO has to be drafted and filed with the register of companies. Once the documents are filed, the incorporation certificate will be issued by the ROC. They will review the documents. If everything is in order, they will issue the incorporation certificate. Last 2-3 months now, in the process of easing what you call businesses for the startup, the government has also interlinked a lot of what you call other stakeholders, like banks, like your labor departments, EF, ESI, PF, GST, wherein as process of incorporation, the day your company is incorporated, you also get a bank account opened automatically, and you also get the PF, ESI registration done and the GST registration done. So you can basically fill the form, you can choose the bank with whom you, and then basis that your bank account will be opened, and the registrations will be given, the GST, ESI, PF. This was the process basically for a company to be incorporated. When it comes to an LLP, the process is same. You have to apply for DIN, you have to apply for DSC, you have to apply for name, and then you file an LLP agreement. You don't have a MOA, AOA. When it comes to a LLP, you need to file an LLP agreement, which generally captures the partnership, the names of the partners, the ownership, everything. So that's how the LLP gets the incorporation certificate once you have filed the LLP agreement. Give me 1 minute, my battery is low, I'll just plug in the charger. Yeah, sorry. Once the company is incorporated, then under the startup registration regime, Government of India has basically given a lot of startup benefits if you are a registered startup. So we will discuss about the benefits, but these are the conditions which have to be adhered to, or which have to be complied when you want to register yourself like a registered startup and avail the benefit which have been given by Government of India. So one of the condition is you need to be a company which is less than 10 years of incorporation. That is one of the condition. Then the annual turnover should not cross 100 crores. So when you are incorporated in a company, you will meet all these conditions. But once you have breached these thresholds, then you will not be able to get the startup benefits. So if you are incorporating a company today, you will basically able to comply the 10-year condition. You will also not have the revenue of 100 crores. But going forward, when you are breaching the thresholds, you will lose the benefits of being a startup. So 10 years, 100 crores, then this is one of the primary condition wherein the business which you are doing should be towards development or improvement of a product, or the business should be scalable business model with high potential for creation of wealth and employment. So these are the two conditions. If your business basically complies or is able to meet this condition, then you are good to go and register yourself with the startup, the startup regime of Government of India. Once the Government of India has given you the certificate that you are a startup, then you have a lot of benefits. So we will discuss the benefits of being a startup in the next slide. But these are primarily the conditions which have to be fulfilled to register as a startup. So just to give you a flavor of how do you register as a startup. So if you have gone through the conditions and if you believe that you are fitting into the conditions, then there is a website called DPIIT, Department of Industrial Trade and Policy, where you basically file your documents in terms of your certificate of incorporation, your director details, your shareholding pattern, and you also file a project report. So when I say project report, it would basically ask you how you are basically complying with the condition of either being innovative or being a what you call scalable business. So those kind of answers have to be given into that project report. Once we have filed that document, the government will review the document, and if they believe that we are fitting the conditions of being a startup, then you will get the registration as a startup. So that is the process. You go onto the website of DPIIT and register yourself. Once you have got the registration, then there are certain benefits under the Income Tax Act. It's not that you have taken the DPIIT registration and you're done. It's not like that. So if you want to avail the tax benefit, then you have to again go to the Income Tax Department. There is a website where you will basically file certain documents with them saying that I'm a registered startup. This is my certificate which has been issued by DPIIT. Basis that, the Income Tax Department will issue another certificate which will give the tax benefit under the startup regime. So that is the entire process. So coming to the advantages which we have if you are a startup, the primary advantage is basically now when you have started the business and you want to raise capital, you will approach HNIs, you will approach VC funds, PE funds, incubation. So it may happen that you have started the business and day one somebody would want to invest into your business at premium. When I say premium, it means that your paid up capital is 1 lakh, but somebody is saying that I'm valuing your business at 1 crore. I will value your business at 1 crore, 2 crore, 5 crore. That means what? They are basically giving you the premium for the business model. So in that case, what happens is there is a law under the Income Tax Act which says that if you are getting any premium from investors, there are certain conditions which have to be met. Otherwise, that premium get taxed in the hands of the business. So one of the exemption which has been given to startup is irrespective of the conditions, you can take any premium from any investor and that will not be taxed. So when I say conditions, the primary condition is if you are taking a premium from an investor, that time you have to basically get a fair market value certificate from a merchant banker. So the merchant banker has to certify that the fair market value of the shares is the value which you have got from the investor. If it is over and above what is your fair market value, that will get taxed in the hands of the business. But that condition is not applicable for a startup. So this is one of the primary and critical exemption which has been given under the law. This is kind of a leeway which the startup has. Otherwise, all the businesses, they have to get the FMV certified. Then only they will have the non-taxed income. Otherwise, their income will be taxed. But for a startup, this is purely exempted, wherein you just basically have a certificate, you get whatever premium you want, and you are not taxed. So this is one of the biggest benefit which a startup has been given. The other benefit is 100% tax deduction of the profit and gains from the business for the startup for a period of 3 years in a block of first 10 years. So if you are a startup registered with Income Tax Department and the DPIIT, then for the entire income for the 10 years, you will be exempted only for 3 years. So that means what? If you are in the first 3 years, 5 years, you are basically loss-making entity, but after 5 years, you have basically earned some profits. Then for 3 years, in that block of 10 years, your income will be exempted. So this is again a tax holiday which has been given to the startups under the income tax regime benefits for the startups. So this is one of the important benefits. Then there are other benefits in terms of rebate in filing of patent, rebate in filing of trademark applications. Generally, there could be X fee, say 5,000 for filing in a trademark application or a patent application. But when it comes to a startup, there has been an 80% rebate. You will end up paying only 2,000. So that is something which has been basically given to the startup, wherein their filing cost would be less. Then there are funds which have been set up by Government of India with a specific mandate wherein the startups will be funded. But it's not that they will just like that fund it, but they will basically go through the model, and if they believe that the model is good and they can take a risk by investing in this kind of model, they will basically invest in the startups if they are a registered startup. And the fund is only specifically floated for investing in registered startup. There is a corpus of 10,000 crores when the fund was set up. So government has been actively investing in startups which are registered and encouraging the entrepreneurs. Then under the labor laws, generally what happens is once you have started the business, once you have basically taken a lot of licenses under labor laws, there could be a lot of nuances. The labor guy can just walk into your premises and he can ask a lot of documents. He can ask for an inspection. But for startup, the mechanism which Government of India has framed is the inspections cannot be conducted for first 3 years. It's all self-certification. The startup only needs to say that we have complied with everything. That's it. So it's not that somebody can come, they can do inspection, they can harass the promoters. So that is something which is again a benefit for the startup in terms of ease of doing business. Then if things are not good, if you want to wind up the company, then under the Companies Act, generally if you want to wind up the company, it takes around 180 days. But for startup, there is a fast track mechanism wherein within 90 days the winding up applications has to be processed by the respective register of companies. So this is again a benefit when it comes to a startup. So next, once you have started the company, once you have the startup registration, if you are complying with the condition which you have to comply, then the next question is what other protections you have to take when you are starting a business. So generally what happens is the promoters may, design a brand. They may, if the business calls for some kind of innovation, they may have patents, or if there are write-ups which are used for the business, there could be copyrights. So generally what happens is the startups start the business, but they don't take any protection under these laws. So under the trademark law, what happens is you can start using your brand, you can start using your mark, but it is always better that you go register your trademark with the trademark registry, so that tomorrow if somebody wants to infringe the trademark, you have the valid certificate to prove it that you are basically the owner of the trademark. But if you have not registered, still you have the protection, but the protection has to be basically through a civil mechanism. You have to go to court, you have to file for a suit, then only you will get the password. But if you are clear that you have a trademark and you have created that trademark, you have a brand name and you have created that brand name, always better you go to the trademark registry, file the application, take the trademark allotted in your name in the respective class. When I say class, if you are in the business of pharma, if you are in the business of say food, you basically see which business is yours, and in that class you go and register the trademark, and then you get the protection. So no third party can infringe the trademark, neither they can use your trademark. So that is a protection which you get when you register your trademark with the trademark registry. Generally the process takes anything between 1 month to 6 months. If you file the application, if there are objections, then the registry will raise the objections, you clarify, they will publish in the journal. If there are no oppositions, you will get the trademark. But if there are oppositions, then the process is different. Then somebody is saying that this trademark should not be allotted to you because they are the owners of the trademark, then basically it takes time. You have to basically prove that why it belongs to you, then only you will be able to get the trademark. Then when it comes to patent, again, patent is something which is basically to protect your product, right? So if you have done something innovative, then you have all the right to go and register with the patent department. So once you have filed for a patent, the patent registry does a worldwide search for the patent, whether somebody owns some same or similar kind of a innovation. If they believe that yes, it can be patented, then they will patent and they will give you a patent certificate. Coming to copyrights, again, copyrights, it's like a work of authorship, wherein you basically file your literature, file your documents, and then get a copyright on the authorship on the material which you have basically created. So these are the 3 primary IP protection which you should have: trademark, patent, and copyrights, depending upon the business which you are doing and depending upon the protections which you want. So if you are in the business of say food, so you I don't know whether you will have any kind of technologies or any kind of innovations which you want to patent, but definitely you will have a brand or a mark which you want to patent, like Swiggy. Swiggy is doing the business of food delivery. So they have basically taken the production of word Swiggy. So their brand cannot be used by anybody. So that is something which you have to go under the trademark. But if you are in the business of innovation, you have done a innovative product, you want to get it patented, you can always go and get it patented and you get the right over it worldwide. And as I told you, copyrights, again, literature, authorship, material, if you want to get it copyright, you can get it. Now, trade secrets, again, trade secret is like non-disclosure. So you just execute a non-disclosure agreements with third parties wherever you are disclosing the confidential information. So there's no registry which registers a trade secret. It's only a contract which you execute with any third party before talking about your confidential information. That is about the IPR, and it is very, very important. It is not costly. It is simple process. Any business which has any innovation, any marks, they should definitely go and register their IP with the respective regulators. So these are some of the common mistakes which in our practice we have seen that a lot of promoters are basically making. So as I previously said, choosing a right structure is very, very important. So you have started your, say, company with a mindset that you want to start a LLP. You have started the LLP, but down the line, if you want to basically get external money, it becomes very difficult. Then you change your mind and you say that I want to convert my LLP into a private company. Then it becomes very, very difficult. It calls for a lot of tax issues. It's always better that you choose your structure wisely, thinking about the future and keeping everything open, keeping all perspective into picture. Then only you should choose then only you should basically bottom down the kind of structure you want to basically use. Then not making the deal clear with the co-founders. So we have basically seen that there are two friends, two relatives, two brothers starting businesses, or multiple friends, multiple relatives starting the businesses, and then they don't basically sign a founders agreement. So what happens is, I know if he is your brother, your friend, your relative, we all trust them. But end of the day, it is always better that you put everything into perspective and document it. It is very, very important, because down the line when the value creation happens at the entity level, the co-founders can get into litigation. So it is always better that you write what will be the role of each co-founder, who will bring in what value into the company. It could be in terms of bringing in cash, it could be in terms of bringing in sweat, it could be in terms of taking a specific role. So you should also define what will be the roles and responsibilities of each co-founder. So my colleague Anita would be talking more about the co-founders agreement in the next slides. But having a co-founder agreement is very, very important to basically make sure that everybody is on the same line, and we don't face any music with each other in future. So that is very, very important. Then non-execution of non-disclosure agreement while discussing business. So what happens is, when you have started business, the promoters are very enthusiastic. They want to talk to 40 investors, 40 friends, a lot of relatives. It becomes very, very important that you should disclose. Casually you are talking, no issues, but when you are disclosing specific information, it is very, very important that you should sign a confidentiality agreement with them, so that they are bound to the non-disclosure obligation. Otherwise, we have seen that you have discussed with few investors and they have taken your idea, they have replicated your idea. So that is very, very important. Signing an NDA when you're talking business with multiple parties, it could be your employees, it could be your suppliers, it could be your investors. If there is a sensitive and the confidential information involved, it's always better that you sign an NDA. So that is very, very important. Then when you are hiring employees, we have seen that companies give them offer letter, but the employment agreement is not elaborative. It only talks about what is your role, what is your salary. And in some of the offer letters, people tend to put termination and notice clauses, but it has to be very, very elaborative. And again, it all depends upon the kind of employee you're hiring. If you're hiring a low-level employee, still it's fine. Maybe you only talk about role, salary, term, termination. But when it comes to critical employees like senior managerial level, then it is very, very important that you basically talk about salary, role, term, termination, notice period, non-compete, confidentiality, non-solicitation, non-disparagement. So the level of employee will decide what kind of employment agreement you need to basically execute. So we have seen companies not executing any document with anybody until they want to basically, until they run into problems or somebody asks them to do it. Otherwise, people are not executing any kind of employment contract. So employment contract is very, very important. Then IP production. So we discussed just now. It's very important. So when you are going for external fundraising, now Swiggy, if Swiggy would have started the business, they would have thought, okay, we don't know whether our business will do good, bad, ugly, and if they would have not registered the Swiggy brand, then today their brand is very, very important for them, right? So that brand brings the value. So we don't know how our IP will bring value. So it is very, very important that you register your IP. It could be trademark, it could be patent, or it could be anything else. But if you have protection under the law, you should definitely go ahead and register your IP. And it is not expensive in India. It is fairly decent and it is fairly simple. So it is very, very important that you register your IP. Then for businesses which are operating online, if you're running a trading platform online, you're running a teaching platform online, you will have terms of use and privacy policy. So in India, what happens is you don't have any data protection law currently, but there are different laws which govern how you will collect the data from public and how you will use that data. Because I've seen a lot of businesses today are depending upon the data. So there is a business model which has evolved wherein a lot of data is being used to generate revenue streams. So data becomes very, very important. So you have to have your terms of use and the privacy policy drafted in terms of the applicable law. So privacy policy, again, what kind of data you are collecting, whether it's a personal information, sensitive information, how are you going to use that information, whether you are going to collect the information, do analytics over the information, and then you will use that information, or you will basically use, for example, if I have given you my number, I have come to your website, I have given you my number. You cannot use my number, you cannot use my sensitive information, or you cannot leak my information to any third party, but you can collect the data, you can do analytics over that data and then create revenue streams. So it is very, very important that everything is captured in the terms of use, how you are basically doing your business, what is your obligation towards your customer, client who is browsing your website, taking your services on the website, and privacy policy will talk about what kind of data you are collecting and how you are processing the data. So that is a contract which will govern the relationship between the company and the end user who is using your services on the website. So terms of use and privacy policy are again very, very important. We have seen companies just copy pasting from different websites. That can be done, but somebody has to basically do a hygiene check. They have to apply their mind and at the right time hire external counsels to review the documents. That is also very, very important. Then obtaining license and permits. So in India, if you have to start business, there are a hell lot of licenses which a business has to take. To start with, when you're starting the business, you have to have GST, you have to have ESI, you have to have PF. Then if you're taking a premises, you need to have a shop establishment license, trade license, professional tax, all that. So I understand that for a business on day one, it is very, very difficult to basically take this kind of license, but because it comes with a lot of cost and there's a lot of efforts which have to be put. But definitely there has to be a call which the entrepreneur has to take, which kind of licenses are very, very critical for the business, and from day one they have to take it. It's not that tomorrow when somebody is wanting to invest in a company and they are basically getting a DD done, due diligence done, at that time somebody says that you don't have this license, I will discount your valuation, or I will basically delay your investment until you basically take these licenses. So it is very, very important that if you are wanting to raise any external capital, all the hygiene issues have to be taken care. Make sure that you have all the critical licenses. There could be a license which is not critical and you can leave it, but that call has to be taken after basically putting proper thought to it and what kind of penalties we have. So it's always better that you make sure that you have all kind of licenses and permits. Then non-compliance with securities laws. So when you start the business, I know you have friends, you have relatives, you have investors who want to invest from day one. So because of lack of knowledge or because of the requirement of the business, I have seen entrepreneurs going ahead and taking money, using the money without basically doing all whatever compliance are required to be done in the Companies Act. So if you today see the Companies Act, there are stringent norms which says that you have to take investment into the company in a specific way. When I say a specific way, that means you open a separate bank account. That money has to come into that bank account. Then you issue shares. Then only you should touch the money. But we see because of lack of knowledge or because of urgency, because of business reasons, money come in different bank accounts without allotment of shares. The promoter use the money. That is one bit of it. Then we have seen that people borrow a lot of money into the business from different parties. But in a company kind of a structure, it is highly regulated and it is clear that from whom you can bring in money. So as a director, you can put in money as loan, but you cannot basically bring in any third party to put in money into your company as a loan. But we have seen people just taking money because of urgency but all those have to be seen. It's not that you take the money today, use it, and then you basically think through how you want to basically comply. So we have seen people taking money, not complying, and then later on getting into problems, penalties with ROCs, investor coming in, they are basically trying to clean the capital structure. It delays everything. So better take money, no problem, but hire a good advisor who basically will take care of all the paperwork and make sure that nothing is having any kind of a loose end. So that is also very, very important. Then the last bit, which will sum up whatever we have discussed now, thinking that any legal problem can be solved later, which is fine, but at some point of time, the problem is if you are basically raising external money, the investor who is coming in will discount the valuation of the company if there are a lot of hygiene issues, a lot of non-compliance in the company, or he will not invest into the company, and basically he will say that, okay, if there are a lot of issues, I don't want to take a risk. Or they may say, okay, you correct all the non-compliances, then only I will invest into your company. So having said that, I will definitely agree that it is very, very difficult to comply 100% what you call laws in India, but it is very, very important to know what laws are applicable to you, and then taking a call whether I want to basically comply or not, and then basically going ahead and then taking a call is very, very important. That call can be taken in terms of what are the penalties under the law, what is the risk, but definitely that exercise has to be done. It's not that you just leave it and then later on it becomes a problem. So that is again very, very important. So I am done. Anita, you can take over for the founders agreement.
Yeah. Thank you, Prashant, and a very good evening to all the participants. I will now deal on this topic as to of importance of founders agreement. So firstly, what is a founders agreement? So a founders agreement is an agreement amongst the co-founders of the company. A startup is not a one-person right. You need people to collaborate with right skills, right competence, right capabilities. And when you collaborate with such people, it is important that you lay down your understanding in writing. So that brings us to our next question, that what is the importance of founders agreement? So founders agreement is important from various perspectives. Firstly, it lays down the roles and responsibilities of the founders. What is the expectation from each founder in the company? It lays down the vision and the mission of the business. And also from an external investor's perspective, it is very important that when an external investor is coming in the company, he also understands that what is the governance mechanism in a company, what is the weightage of each founder in a company, and what is expected from each founder. So that also leaves a very positive impact on the incoming investor, because he understands that there is some sort of professionalism and transparency with which the startup is being run. Another question which we often come across from startups is that what is the right time to have a founders agreement in place? So in our view, the right time to have a founders agreement in place is at the very start of your business venture. So you should not wait for your business to grow and then execute a founders agreement and have a founders agreement in place and then to lay down your understanding. It is always advisable that you should have your founders agreement in place at the very start of your business venture. Of course, as the external investment comes in, as your business grows, the founders agreement would require changes, but it should be done the earlier, the better. So now what are the key clauses which are there in a founders agreement? So one is on capital contribution, which is what is the initial, which can be initial, and how the future funding will take place in the company. So the initial capital contribution is what is the monetary investment which is being made by each founder in the company. What is the shareholding? What will be the shareholding of each founder in the company? And how, whenever in future as business grows, obviously money is required. So how and in what mechanism each founder is required to put in the money in the company? It is usually on a pro rata basis proportionate to their existing shareholding. And we also will capture in the founders agreement that what happens if a founder is unable to put in the money? What will be the implication? So usually in such case, maybe his proportionate shareholding in the company will go down. So all these need to be captured in the founders agreement as to what is the initial and how the future funding will work in a company. Then roles and responsibilities of the founder. So again, it is very important that we have the roles and responsibilities of the founders clearly laid down in the founders agreement, as in who will take care of which aspect of the business, who will take care of operation, who will take care of finance, who will take care of administration, marketing. There are so many areas in a business. So when we have properly laid down written roles and responsibility of each of the founders, then it becomes very easy, and it becomes easy for the founders also to understand, so that they also know that who is looking after what aspect of the business. Then another important clause is on restriction on transfer of shares. So when founders collaborate together, obviously everybody wants that they should be there in a company for a certain period of time. It should not happen that they suddenly want to leave the company in between, and then what happens to the startup, because each founder is critical to the business and he is required to run the business. So there are certain restrictions on his exit or his transfer of shares. So there is usually a lock-in period which is there, as in he cannot transfer his shares for a certain period of time. Even if he wants to transfer due to whatsoever reasons, then there are mechanisms laid down, whether whether he'll be providing a right of first refusal to the existing founder. So the exiting founder will give a first right to the existing founder to buy his shares, so that the existing founders suddenly do not find themselves in a situation where suddenly some third parties whom they don't even know have come in the picture in the company. So this is one of the very important clauses wherein we can restrict and we can lay down the mechanism in which the shares of the founders would be transferred in future. Then next important is decision making. So this again is proportionate to the equity shareholding in the company. So decision making and composition of board of directors. So the higher percentage of holding one founder has in the company, accordingly his representation on the board would be higher. So obviously then there are concept of reserved matters, because there may be a certain founder who may not be holding substantial holding in the company, but then some certain critical decisions, business decisions, should be taken with the consent of all the founders. Suddenly tomorrow you want to change the business of the company, suddenly tomorrow you want to change some critical aspect or invite funding or whatever. So certain important critical business decisions is usually they are called reserved matters, and they usually have to be taken with the consent of all the founders. And other decision making will obviously depend on the proportionate board composition which is there and the representation of each founder on the board. Then we have non-compete, non-solicitation clauses. So courts in India have again divided this into pre-termination, how the pre-termination non-compete would operate, how post-termination non-compete would operate. So pre-termination courts have been very liberal, that during the term when the founder is associated with the company, he obviously cannot compete with the business of the company. He has to devote his full time attention to the business, and he cannot simultaneously and parallelly start a competing business. Post termination, suppose if a founder leaves in between, so there are obviously will have to impose non-compete, non-solicitation obligations. As to non-compete, as in he cannot start a competing business. Non-solicitation means he cannot solicit the current employees and the clients and vendors or whosoever has been associated with the company. So for post-termination non-compete obligations, now courts have again held that if the restrictions are reasonable in terms of whether in terms of area or whatever, then only the same can be enforceable, and you cannot put a blanket restriction on somebody to earn livelihood. So non-compete restriction is a very important restriction upon exit of the founder from a company, and also while the founder is employed and is working for the company. Similarly for non-solicitation. And confidentiality is again important, because whenever a business is being run, there's a lot of confidential information which is kept with the founders, and obviously that information should not be leaked to anybody else, because that is the crux and that is the heart and soul of a business. So that confidentiality obligation is important for each founder to ensure that the confidential information remains within the company. Then intellectual property rights. So again, as Prashant has mentioned in his previous slide, that how important is intellectual property for a company. So usually what we have seen is that when the company is a startup, so any individual who has come in, so whether it's a domain name or any mark which is being registered, it is usually registered in the name of the founder. But that should not be the case. The IP, whether it is domain name, whether it is mark, or anything which is being developed by any founder or employee of the company, it should be assigned to the name of the company, so that the individuals may come and go, but the rights of each IP which has been developed by the company, by the founders or any of its employees, should always remain with the company. Then on deadlock resolution. So what happens if there is a if there are hitches amongst the co-founders in future, and to avoid any dispute or ambiguity in future, a dispute resolution or a deadlock resolution mechanism is usually covered in the agreement, which lays down that what will happen when there is a deadlock, and what is the mechanism in which such deadlock can be resolved amongst the company. And then another important is dispute resolution. So dispute resolution is, of course, if the deadlock has not been resolved, then how do you solve that dispute, whether by way of arbitration, mediation? So that lays down the mechanism of dispute resolution amongst the founders. So that is it on the founders agreement. So to sum it up, the founders agreement is one of the very important documents which a startup should aim to have right from the start of their business venture, rather than waiting for their business to grow. And then, because once the business grows, complexity grows, and then to have something in writing becomes much more difficult. So it's always important that we have a founders agreement in place right from the beginning, so that it lays down the terms, the rights and obligations, what is expected from each founder, so that each founder is also clear of his responsibilities towards the company. And as I mentioned earlier, it is also very important from an external investor perspective. He also understands then the governance mechanism in the company. So that's on the founders agreement. Now we can take the questions.
Yeah, Anita, we can take questions.
Yeah. So first question that we have received is that what is the process to acquire DIN for a LLP? So I believe there is one form which we need to file, I think DIR 3, which we need to file with MCA, and that's how we can get DIN for.
Yeah, I will chip in there, Anita. So there are, if you are incorporating a company, or if you are incorporating a company or LLP, then automatically in the form you give your PAN, the forms allowed you the DIN along with the incorporation. But if you are not incorporating a company, but you are wanting to join a company or a LLP where the LLP is already incorporated, then you have to file the DIR 3 form. You have to pay 500 rupees. It's fairly simple process. You are allotted the DIN. That is the process for getting a DIN.
Yeah. So next question was on that, can a NRI shareholder become a director in a private company? What is the procedure?
No, so for becoming a director, there is no special procedure. If there are NRI, individuals who want to become director in an Indian company, no problem. The only thing which we need to see is when we are taking DIN, that time the process of taking DIN is different. They have to send their documents from abroad. Those documents have to be apostilled. Otherwise, becoming a director in a company, there are no restrictions. NRI is as good as a domestic individual to become a director in a company. There are no further steps which are required, or additional compliance which has to be done by a overseas citizen to become a director in an Indian company.
Then for registration of a startup, is it only a recently incorporated company, or a division of existing business can also apply?
No, division cannot apply. If it is a demerger which is hived off from a company, then you will not be able to apply for a income tax exemption. That is specifically given under the Income Tax Act.
Next question was again on the startup incentive. So do we get automatic tax exemption for 3 years if we register with DPIIT?
No, as part of the presentation, I mentioned that once you have registered the company with DPIIT as a startup, it is one step, what you call, which you have done. But for the getting exemption from the income tax department, you need to basically apply for exemption from the income tax department, wherein you have to uh, submit the documents along with the registration which certificate which you have got from DPIIT. So getting registration from DPIIT is one bit to get registered as a startup under the government regime, but to get tax benefit, you have to register with the income tax department. That is the second level process that has to be done. Then only you get the benefits under the income tax act. If we have not registered with the income tax department, we have registered only with DPIIT, then you don't get the income tax benefits.
Okay, then we have another question. For online consulting business, is shops and establishment license compulsory?
Option establishment license is required in case if you are having a premises. So if I have a registered office and if I'm using that registered office for my business, then the option establishment license would be required. But if you are operating online and if you are not occupying any premises, then maybe you don't require this option establishment license.
Okay. Then we have another question. Can one apply for GST along with company incorporation application, or should it be done after?
No, currently it is all automatic. So you just fill the incorporation forms. Once you have filled the incorporation form, you automatically get the, you have the option to get the GST registration along with the SIPF, and you have the option to get the bank account opened along with the company incorporation.
Okay. Can a subsidiary of a startup apply for startup certificate and income tax exemption?
It can, but again, end of the day, those conditions have to be met. So if you are a subsidiary doing business and basically qualifying in the definition of being an innovative company, generating employment, your business is scalable, and if you are complying with all the, what do you call, turnover and life criteria, then you can apply. There's no, what do you call, separate exemption or benefit which is given for the subsidiary. You will be treated as a separate company and you can apply for startup registration.
Okay, then there's another question. When should a founder agreement be executed? Before incorporation, after incorporation? So a founder's agreement should be executed after the incorporation of the company between the founders.
And I will add what do you call some.
Yeah.
I want to give some inputs there. So founders agreement, generally it is executed after the incorporation of the company. But if the founders want to basically write and basically decide whether how they want to run the business before the company is incorporated, they can sign the founders agreement and they can replicate the terms of the founders agreement in the articles of association. That also is a good way to do it. So if you are clear what kind of roles and responsibilities each founder has, you execute before the company is incorporated and replicate that agreement into the articles of association. That would give you what you call enforceability protection. But yes, we have seen companies don't have that kind of clarity. The founders don't have that kind of clarity. They do it later on. But it is better if you are able to basically think through, decide what each founder will have the role, what will be the shareholding percentage, how you want to basically govern the business. Then you can write it before, and then that becomes the charter document for the company.
Okay. Then can a e-commerce aggregator dealing in handicraft file for a startup?
E-commerce handicraft. I will not be able to answer that question until I have more input, but just to give you a flavor, it's not about whether you are an e-commerce company or a brick and mortar company. It's all about whether you are in the business of innovation, whether your business model is innovative, whether your business model is scalable, whether you are generating employment. So if you are able to fit into any of these conditions, and if you are able to basically prove that your business model is scalable and that business model will generate employment, you will be able to register. So I think it's not about what kind of business you are doing. Your business should have this kind of integrated mechanics to basically give you registration for a startup.
Okay. If a founder exits the startup by selling his stake, will that be liable for capital gains tax? Prashant, maybe you can answer that.
Yeah, so Whether you are a founder or you are a non-founder, if you're selling the stake from a company and selling it to a third party, then definitely you have to pay capital gain. If it's a short-term capital gain, you have to pay a short-term capital gain. If it's a long-term capital gain, you have to pay a long-term capital gain. So founders are like other shareholders. It's not that you have founders as one set and you have other shareholders wherein under the Income Tax Act, everybody is a shareholder, and whoever is selling the shares as per the Income Tax Act, you have to pay capital gains.
Okay. Next is that if somebody has purchased a website domain, how do we ensure that we've not infringed into somebody else's trademark?
Now, see, there is a process under the trademark registry wherein you do the search of the trademark. So you can just log into the trademark registry, do the search, you just type your what do you call name or mark, whatever. So if you are wanting to say register, our firm is Samishti, you just type Samishti. If there are similar same name with Samishti in same category, then that will pop up. So then you decide whether somebody is owning it. Basis that you basically decide whether you will be able to get the trademark or not. If there are already marks which are similar, same or deceptive, then you should not go for that name, even though you have applied for the domain. So make sure that you do a registry search and then you decide on the name of the trademark and the domain name, because generally the business will have a brand which will also reflect in their domain. So it's not good to have a different domain with a different business name. Before you take a domain, always better to see whether you will be able to get that kind of a brand. Then only decide what kind of domain you need to have.
Then to apply for a startup certificate, is there any minimum number of employee or revenue which should be there before the application?
No, it's not what you call required. As long as you are able to meet the conditions which I have told you. You should be a company which is incorporated less than 10 years. Your revenue should not be more than 100 crores. And you are able to basically prove that you comply with those one of those conditions, then you can apply. So having a minimum revenue or a minimum employee is not a requirement.
Okay, we have one question, whether Samishti extends all these services in terms of, I think, execution of founders agreement or employment agreement. So yeah, we do provide all such services for drafting of founders agreement, employment agreement, and whatever agreements are commercial agreements which are required for running of the business of the company. I'm just checking on the other questions. Can an NRI become a partner in a partnership firm? Partnership firm, yeah.
If you are asking about a traditional partnership firm, yes, but on a non-repatriation basis. It's not that if a partner becomes if an NRI wants to become a partner in a partnership firm, he can send money from abroad, but that money will be non-repatriable. But if it's a LLP, limited liability partnership, if that business is allowed under FDI with a sectorial limit of 100%, then yes. If you're asking about traditional partnership, they can do it. There's no restriction, but they will not be able to take out the capital appreciation from India. They can invest, and then in case if they sell, that time that money will be basically parked in India, and they can use it for their what do you call investment in India, other purposes. But that money cannot be taken out of India. It will be on a non-repatriation basis.
Then next is, do we need a separate employment agreement for the founders if the founders already have a founder agreement which defines the roles and responsibilities too?
Not required. If founders agreement will talk about their rules and rules and responsibility and their salary, their exit, all that generally are captured in the founders agreement.
Yes. Can an employee of another company, just a second. Can an employee of another company be a co-founder without leaving the company? Or how to incorporate an already employed person as board member? So can an employee of another company be a co-founder without leaving the company?
So under the law, there is no restriction. Under the employment contract which that employee would have signed with the other company, there could be a restriction. But under the law, there is no restriction. But before you make that person as a co-founder in another company, it is always better to see whether the employment contract of that person for its current employment doesn't restrict that. So if there are terms which says that you should not basically do any other stuff other than being employed in this company, then he will be end of the day he will be breaching the contract which he has signed. Technically, under the law, no restrictions, but contractually, it has to be seen whether he has taken any kind of an embargo on that.
Yeah. So we have another question. So if the founders have already been allocated the shares and have got the funding, and now they have got new round of funding and the new shareholders table updated with all the founders and investors and how many shares each one of them will hold, then in this case, do we need to have a new founders agreement?
No, see, founders agreement. Yeah, so founders agreement would be between the founders. Once there are external investors who have come in or there are other shareholders who have joined, then you have to execute a shareholders agreement. In the shareholders agreement, you will be the promoters of the company, maybe both the founders, and then there could be investors, then there could be other shareholders. And you draft a shareholders agreement where you define what rights promoters will have, what rights investors will have, what restrictions other shareholders will have. Founders agreement generally falls off when an external investor comes and you execute a shareholders agreement. Founders agreement is only in initial stages of the company where there are only two individuals who are running the business. Once the new investor comes in, everything is captured in the shareholders agreement.
Can we apply for DIN in anticipation of becoming a director on a company?
Yeah, you can hold a DIN, but that will call for a lot of what you call yearly compliances. Every year you have to do a KYC and all. Otherwise, you can hold a DIN.
Business earnings of a partnership company, can it be repatriated by NRI partner?
I think I have already answered that. If they are investing in a traditional partnership firm and not in LLP, repatriation is not possible. And if they are fitting into LLP structure and they have invested as per the FDI norms, they can repatriate.
How to apply NDA before registration while discussing the idea? How to apply NDA before registration while discussing the idea?
So that's fine. See, it's a contract. The non-disclosure agreement that you have an idea and you are the owner of the idea, not the entity which you are basically wanting to form. And then you get the protection. So if you have any confidential information, being an founder of the company, which will be passed on to the company later once it is formed, you become the owner for that NDA and you become the beneficiary and you are disclosing. So in case if somebody breaches the NDA, then you have a recourse on the guy who has signed the NDA. Signing an NDA contractually doesn't have anything to do with whether the company is incorporated or not. If the company is incorporated, if the IP belongs to the company will be the signatory. If promoter owns it on day one, then the promoter will be the signatory.
Okay. So we have another question. Is it possible to create a founders agreement with vesting rights after shareholders agreement created and funding received?
It can be done. It can be done. It's a what you call restrictive bucket or earning bucket which you are creating. So you are saying that okay, uh, after certain milestones or thresholds are met, then the founders will get these shares. So that can be done contractually. From where the shares will come is important. So if you are a promoter, you will not be able to get the shares from the employee stock options, because until you are a startup, you will not be able to get the employee stock options. If because promoters are not eligible for employee stock options. You can have a contract which says that okay, in case I have achieved this milestone, the other founder will transfer the shares to the other co-founder. So that is possible. Contractually vesting, fine. But if the shares have to come from the company, in what mode is important. Whether in ESOP, it cannot be allotted as ESOP. So that cannot come from the company. It has to come from the other shareholders. So that can be done.
Okay, a lot of people are asking about contact details of Samishti. So you can go to our site samishtilegal.in, wherein you can get our contact details, and it's there in our webinar information also.
Any other questions, Anita? We are done.
There's one more question. Without physical address, can an online business be registered?
No, it cannot be. So you need to give your register office address. That could be your home also. So technically, you have to have a registered office when you are incorporating a company.
We have one last question. What is sweat equity?
Sweat equity is nothing but an equivalent to an option, an employee stock option. So there are different rules. So being for an employee stock option, the employee has to pay consideration, but for sweat equity, the the promoter, founder, or whoever has given the sweat to the company need not pay any consideration. But there are a set of different rules. So for employee stock option, you have a different rules under the Companies Act. For sweat equity, you have different rules. So sweat equity is more restrictive. There are a lot of conditions. How much you can give sweat equity to founders, when you can give. But for ESOP, again, you just say they need to be your employees. As long as they are employees, you have decided the strike price, you can give it. But when it comes to sweat equity, it is more to the people who have given the sweat, generally the promoters and the founders, and that comes with a lot of restrictions. And I would suggest that in case if somebody wants to give sweat equity to founders, then the process under the Companies Act has to be read. But if they are employees, then they should go under the employee stock option plan. That is the best way to do it, and it is more easy than when compared to the sweat equity.
Okay, we have got another question. What is the difference between an executive and a non-executive director?
See, executive are individuals who are who are involved in the day-to-day business of the company, like a managing director, whole-time director. Non-executive are the individuals who are like a sleeping director. They just come to the board meeting and they just give their ideas. They basically give their views. But executive are guys who are fully employed by the company. They are paid salaries and they are involved in the day-to-day business of the company. Non-executive are like they may give advice to the company in the board meetings. They don't draw any salaries and they are not involved in day-to-day business of the company. So this is the primary difference between the executive and non-executive director.
Okay. One more question. Is trademark certificate important for startup?
See, end of the day, if you have innovated a brand, if you have innovated a mark, you need not register it mandatorily. But tomorrow, if somebody goes to a trademark registry and applies for the same or similar brand, and if the registry either gives the brand or you get to know and you object. So if the registry has given the brand, then you have to prove that you have been using this trademark before the allocation has been done to the other party. So that proving will happen at the court level. So it is very, very important that you register your trademark, put it in the registry. Tomorrow when somebody applies it, the registry will go through their records and they will not allot the brand. But if you have not taken the brand registration, then trademark registry will allot. Then you have to go to the court and then prove it that you have been using before that, and then get a password. So it's always better that you go and register, put it in the registry, so that the registry itself will not allow same or similar kind of a brand. But it's not mandatory, but it will call for a lot of other nuances in case if somebody breaches the brand or gets into an infringement.
Okay. So yeah, those were the questions. That's it, all the questions. Yeah, so thank you everybody for attending the session. We have our next session scheduled on next Friday, 18th of September, in which we will be covering about fundraising process, the options, various instruments which are available for issuance, what are the legal contracts which a startup needs to enter, and also on the employee stock option. So do again join us for the session, and thank you for attending the session today. Prashant, you would like to say anything?
Thanks a lot. I would request everybody to join the next session and take advantage of learning about fundraising and capital instrument valuation. That will give a lot of insight. Today we discussed more on the startup registration, how do you start the business, but people who have already started the business, who are looking for fundraising, that session will give a lot of insight for them. So it would be great if all of them attend that session and take more insight into that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone.